Right, very good. So welcome everybody to the lecture. We're going to talk about two things today. On the one hand, basically citations. Why do we quote things and how? Okay, and we'll talk about that. But then we're going to talk about something a bit more general. And that is an issue that has come up in the past, maybe 15 years, give or take, and it's predatory publishing. And basically the thing will be, why does it matter and why should you care about predatory publishing? You should be careful about it. And to be honest, the importance of this lecture, sort of is brought home by the fact that at least one student in this class had trouble with that, and he ended up having several sources that were no good because they were predatory publishing. Okay, so you need to be super careful about this, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, but so it will be two parts. We'll probably take a little break in the middle so that I can get more water or something like that. All right, so let me get my slides ready here, and then we will get going. All right, so, all right, you should be seeing the slides now. Are you seeing them?
Yes.
Yes, all right, very good. Okay, so we're going to talk about sorry, they're noisy in the room next door. So we're going to talk about citations, how and why and when to quote, which is really an important thing. So the first question, of course, is why should you quote something, right? I mean, after all, what's the point? What's the purpose of that? Well, the answer to that is that there are two main reasons for doing it. One is basically documenting, okay? So in other words, you want to make sure that other people can find this source and talk about it just like you did, okay? So that's important, and that's a very good reason in and of itself. But then there's also another reason, which is that when you're quoting someone else's work, you really have an intellectual debt to them that you need to pay up. In other words, you didn't come up with those ideas, the other author did. And it's wrong for you to claim those ideas, okay? So in other words, if you say, I don't know, Grice's ideas all start from ordinary language philosophy, right? Well, was this my idea? No, right? Obviously, I read it somewhere, right? Now, let's say, for example, that I read this in Searle. I don't remember where I read it, but let's say. Then it would be unfair for me to say, hey, I think that Grice's ideas come from ordinary language philosophy, because then people say, ooh, Sal's very clever. He thinks that Grice's ideas come from ordinary language philosophy, right? But in fact, the clever person is Searle, right? Assuming that he said that, right? So it's important that you don't take credit for what is not your work, okay? So that's an ethical, moral reason for doing that. And it's very important, because if you don't do that, it's plagiarism. And often people don't realize that it's plagiarism, even if you put the title of the work somewhere in your paper, or if you have the work quoted in the bibliography. But if you don't acknowledge in the text what you're taking from the author, it's still plagiarism. And plagiarism is serious business. I mean, in fact, I can tell you that, you know, I personally expelled a student from the university for plagiarism. Hi, come in. You know, so it's a thing, and it can have very serious consequences. You can pull up your shirt. You know, there's a few other reasons, but they're less important in overall. So, for example, you know, showing that you've read the literature, that's an important thing, because you need to say, yes, I went through I did the homework, I read the stuff. Then there is a further reason, which is unlikely that you will encounter, but you need to be aware of this, is if you find a mistake in someone's work, then you need to quote exactly as they said, and that's what verbatim means, okay, word by word, verbatim. You need to exactly quote what they said in order then to come back and say, and by the way, that is wrong. Okay, because if you paraphrase what they said, then you may be accused of misparaphrasing what they said. Oh, well, that's not what I said. You know, you say that I'm wrong, but I never said that Grice stole the ideas from ordinary language philosophy. I said he was influenced, right? And so you know, if you refuted the idea that Grice stole from ordinary language philosophy, you've accomplished nothing, because you were misquoting my remarks. Okay, so that's another reason to quote, you know, verbatim. So this is what I just said a second ago, literally as it was quoted. And the only reason to do this is if the specific wording is relevant to your argument, which means that 99% of the time you should not quote verbatim. It doesn't matter if the author puts it particularly well, or if it's a very nice, succinct summary, whatever. The truth is that students overquote all the time, verbatim. Okay, so don't do that. You know, think about it. Is the actual wording that the student is actually using that important? Okay, if not, then you don't need to. You don't need to quote it verbatim. Now, then this is a very important thing. Never, under any circumstance, ever, use secondhand citation, okay? And what that means is, let's say that you have an author who is quoting another author. You cannot say, as Josh, so let's say that it's Attardo quoting Pickering, right? So then you cannot say, as Pickering says, quoted in Attardo, okay? Or God help us, say, as Pickering says, and not reveal that you got it from Attardo, okay? Now, and you may say, well, why? Why not, right? Well, the answer to that is because you don't know that Attardo is a reliable source on Pickering. Okay, so you always have to go get the original article. Okay, and then you say, well, what if I can't get the original article? Easy, don't quote it. Okay, because that is the surefire way of getting in trouble. Okay, and I will give you an example of this. But that's not the one that I want to give you. So this is, by the way, this is a true story that happened to me last year, or a year and a half ago. Okay, so can you close the door? I get sent a book proposal to review. And as I'm reading the book proposal, it talks about a certain author. It's actually three authors that, of course, three authors that have written this this book, and they have this book, right? And the author of the proposal quotes them as saying something, okay? And I think to myself, that is very, very strange, because this book is about pronunciation, it's about prosody, and it's got absolutely nothing to do with humor, which is what this book was supposedly to be talking about. So I'm like, I don't know that these people ever talked about humor, because it's a book about pronunciation. But because I am conscientious, I say, I'm gonna check. So I get the book, I go through it, and of course they never talk about humor at all, as I fully expected. So I'm really puzzled, because I'm like, why would this person say that Brown and so et al. Talks about humor when they don't talk about humor, right? And so it was kind of a mystery. So then I reread more carefully the passage where she was talking, and I realized that what she had done is she had misread a passage in an article that I and some colleagues had written, in which we quoted Brown et al. In relation to the length of pauses, okay? Because we said we're going to assume that a long pause is a pause that's longer than 0.6 seconds, 600 milliseconds, right? As Brown et al. Do, right? So in other words, we're quoting Brown et al. As an authority on the length of pauses. But because she never checked what Brown et al. Was, she misunderstood and thought that Brown et al. Were talking about pauses in humor, which they're not. We are the ones that were talking about pauses in humor, not Brown et al. Okay? So needless to say, at that point I realized that she'd just not checked her sources. She was quoting stuff that she had not read. And so needless to say, my review of the book was very negative. There were other reasons why it was a bad book to begin with. And so guess what? The book was never published. The publisher rejected it on my recommendation. Okay? So that's an example of what happens when you don't do your homework. If she had done her homework, she would have not quoted Brown et al. As talking about the humorous pauses, which they don't. They never talk about humor at all. All right? So in other words, the reason for avoiding secondhand citations is that you can fall flat on your face and embarrass yourself. And if you do, it's very, very bad. Okay? I'm sorry, man. Can you go ask them to turn it down? I mean, this is ridiculous. All right, so I apologize for this. It's really noisy in the other classroom. So here's an example of a citation, right? So this is a piece of text from Bernstein, who's a British sociolinguist. You know, and it's about restricted code, and we don't really need to go into a lot of detail. Thank you, I appreciate it. Yeah, close the door. So here's the citation, right? So now I'm going to give you an example of a bad use of this citation. Okay. So here he said this would be the example. So Bernstein claims that, quote, "The point I want to make is that a restricted code is available to all members of society at the social conditions which generated are as the social conditions which generated are universal," right? So this is a quote, right? But what's the purpose, right? Why are you quoting? The point I want to make is that. That doesn't add anything to the quote. Okay? So there's no point in quoting that, right? And then this is a 3.5 line quote, and all it does is say there is a restricted code. Okay, because in the example I say Bernstein claims there is a restricted code, and then the idea of restricted code has been met by criticism, right? So why use the quote and not just say Bernstein introduced the idea of restricted code? It was met with criticism. Okay, so this is an unnecessary verbatim citation. Okay. All right, so now instead, let's look at a good use of the overcitation from the same material. So here, this hypothetical author, me, says Bernstein's idea of restricted code has been criticized as belittling working class speakers. However, Bernstein distinguishes between intellectual skills and having, quote, access to a, quote, code by virtue of the implication of class background, page 62, and being, quote, limited to this code among sections of the lower working class, end quote. Okay? So here I am arguing against the people who argued against Bernstein, because they're saying, oh, Bernstein ignores social class and doesn't realize that the limited code means that if you're working class, you are restricted, you're limited, because first of all, he talks about having access to a code, okay, and then he's saying that it's limited among sections of the lower working class, so not across the board, right? So in other words, I'm using verbatim quotes from Bernstein to make a point. Okay, in other words, there is a reason for having the exact words. Okay, I'm saying access because it's important that he said access and not say that's the only thing they speak. I mean, you see the difference between speaking a language and having access to a language, right? Those are two different things, right? The other thing, he says that the restricted code is by virtue of the implication of class background and not intellectual skills, right? So again, it's important to say that he says by virtue of the implications of class background, okay? It's a different thing than if he had said by intellectual skill, okay? So this is a good use of citation. It's a use of verbatim citation that functions. Again, let me be very clear. It's one thing to say, as I do here at the beginning, Bernstein 1964, right? That's a citation, that's fine. What you're saying is, you want to know about Bernstein work, go look it up. It's the 1964 paper. All right? That's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about here is this here, the verbatim citations, okay? That is where you're quoting the exact words, okay? So again, the moral of this is you should quote verbatim only when there is a reason to quote the exact words and not just summarize the idea of restricted code, of the idea that you want to express. So here, this is a bad example because all I'm doing is introducing the word restricted code. There is no need to use verbatim citation. Indeed, here, I introduced the idea of restricted code without a verbatim citation, just with an inline citation of Bernstein 1964. All right? So that's the difference that I'm stressing. So again, verbatim citation only if there is a reason to do so. All right, so this brings up then another thing. How much should you quote, right? Here, the problem tends to be that students overquote. It can be for a number of reasons, mostly because they're insecure, so they feel that by quoting, they can't go wrong because if they take the exact words of the writer, they can't be wrong, right? So that's insecurity. But that's a problem, okay? Because it is you who is speaking, not the author, right? This is the mistake that students make very often, is that it reads like this is Bernstein speaking and the author is like here doing nothing. But it's your paper, it's your voice that needs to come out. It's your ideas. You're using Bernstein. You're not just letting Bernstein talk. He already did. He already published the article, the book that you're quoting. Okay? So practically speaking, okay, you should have a rough estimate that for every line of someone else's text that you're quoting verbatim, you should have at least 5 or 6 lines of your text discussing it. Okay? If you have less than that, you're quoting too much, and you should delete the quotes because most of the time they will be useless. They're not actually helping you. Okay? Now, if you are using a large quote, like a long quote that's more than 5 or 6 lines long, first of all, don't do it. Okay? Don't do it, because if you try to publish your work afterwards, you will see that publishers will not like it and will have you change it. So might as well do it right away. And plus, if it's like a long quote, you should summarize, right? I mean, there's no point in having a super long paragraph there if all you're doing is introducing the content of that paragraph. Okay, so if all you're doing is saying this is what so-and-so says about restricted code or whatever, then summarize in your own words. Okay, now there are situations where it may be okay to use long quotes. If, for example, you say, in this passage here, you know, so-and-so says blah, 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 and then you spend 2 or 3 pages analyzing that passage. Okay, that's fine. You're doing a long analysis. Another possibility would be you're really sort of like attacking viciously an author, and you need to show that their entire line of reasoning is wrong. Okay, so then it might be okay to have like a big chunk of text, which you will then proceed to take apart and rip apart. Another potential situation is if you have to quote, for example, the principle of cooperation, right? So the principle of cooperation is like 4 maxims, each one with some maxims, etc. So if you want to say, and here's the principle of cooperation, it's going to be like half a page of text that you're going to be quoting, right? And that's fine, okay? But it's extremely rare that you would be in the situation of having to quote the principle of cooperation as a whole, okay? But if you did, I can see that that would be a thing. And then finally, if you are doing a literary analysis, then it's very common to have a long piece of text that you then proceed to analyze. Now, however, you should be careful about that in the sense that it may be okay within the field to have a long piece of text and then an analysis, but the publisher is probably going to make you take it out because they're afraid of having to pay for it, you see? And so, you may find yourself in a situation where you have to, so then let's say that most of your paper consists of an analysis of this text. If you try to go to publish it, the publisher is going to say no, because they would have to pay the copyright, and they don't want to pay the copyright, or even worse, they'll charge you, right? And that's really bad, Okay, so then most likely you're better off not using long quotes of text that are still under copyright. My strategy has always been use authors that lived in the 18th century at the latest. So that way they're all out of copyright and you're good to go. All right, so how not to quote mistakes. One of the things that you find in recent years, and we'll talk about this in the second half of the lecture, where we talk about the Google effect, is that people have like gazillions of sources and they quote them more or less randomly. Okay. So, for example, here is a passage from an article or a book, I don't remember, by an author, and you can tell that these quotes are there randomly. There is no rhyme or reason for them to be there. For each one of these lists, I could give you a list of other 10 sources that could have been there. Why these and not the other 10 or 20? No reason given except these are the sources that the author chose to quote. Okay, and so what is this telling us? Nothing. It's just like, in this case, I think they're organized chronologically, but then they're only mostly quoted in the 2000s. There's a 193, but I think everything else is in 2000 and after. Does that mean nobody ever wrote about this before? Of course not. There's plenty of sources on this before. So why only after 2000? We'll answer that question in the lecture about Google effect. So this is what I call a safety blanket. Okay, where basically all that the author is interested in doing is saying, hey, I want to make sure nobody can accuse me of not quoting the literature. So I'm going to list everybody that I'm aware of who's even remotely written about this subject, so that way, nobody can say you didn't do your homework, okay? But in all likelihood, they've not read the sources, okay? And we're going to talk about that in the other half of the lecture as well, okay? So this is bad. You don't want to do this. This is really bad pseudo scholarship. Okay, it really is pretending to have done the research when you haven't really done so. The other thing that you shouldn't do is editorialize, which is basically when you express an opinion on something which is not necessary. In other words, there is no particular reason to say that. It's just your opinion, and you feel that the rest of the universe is entitled to it, okay? That's usually not a good thing. So I gave there some examples, it's amazing. No one has written on, smiling in oral corrective feedback, right? Why is it amazing? Well, because you're the one that thought of it, right? So that's your editorial line. So don't do that, okay? Avoid loaded words. Don't say the first ever study on humor and religion, because then, of course, people will do it as a matter of entertainment to go find sources about humor and religion prior to the one that you claim to be the first study and embarrass you publicly saying that. Right? So don't do that, okay? Don't use words like amazing, astonishing, incredible, what's the point? Okay, you say in the article so-and-so or in the incredible article so-and-so, right? Why tell us that it's incredible according to you? It doesn't do anything. No one cares about your opinion, but people care about your facts, okay? So don't editorialize, present the information as it is, okay? All right, so summing up, we quote to acknowledge the intellectual debt and to make sure that people can find the information, okay? And then we need to be quoting, if you're quoting in text, just to give the information where the information comes from, go crazy, do it, it's good. But don't do that for verbatim citation, that is word by word citation. Because if you do that, you need to be damn sure that you're talking more than the people that you're quoting. And not just more by one word, it has to be, 4 or 5 times as much as they are talking. It's your paper, not their paper. Okay, so remember that. Now, this puts then in perspective APA, right? Why do we keep banging on you and saying you must use APA? The citations have to be in APA. If you're going to cite something, use APA. Well, because it's a style, it's a format, and it allows consistency in providing the information that then lets you find the sources that the person is citing. Okay? If you don't have a reference style, it may be confusing and you wouldn't know where the information was. If everybody just randomly puts the information where they want, you don't know whether something is a page number, whether it's a year. There's journals that have 2,000 pages in an issue. So, 2010 could be the page number or it could be the year. So it's useful to know where, the information goes. In APA, you put the year in parentheses, in round parentheses, right after the name of the author. So you can know immediately which one is the year. In other styles, they put it at the end, right? So you need to know, and that's why we say become familiar with APA and use it always, okay? And is it annoying? Yes, it is, okay? Now, there's software that will do it for you, and we have it in the library, so you can go to the library and use it. Right now, the name escapes me, but I will put it in. Do any of you remember? What is it? Is it ProSite? No, it's not. It's no. That's the LMS. All right, I can't remember, but I will put it in a note on the web page. But there is software that will do that for you. It will put the commas and the periods and the parentheses and all of that in the right place. And if you look at my lecture on using Google Scholar, Google Scholar will do it for you as well. You can then cut and paste it into your paper. So, no, that's not what I'm talking about. All right, so that's why we say use a reference style, because it facilitates the process that we just described of quoting and referencing sources. All right. All right. Any questions about what I said so far?
No.
No. I can't see who you are. Non-Julia and non-Shannon.
Hi, Teresa.
Teresa. Hi, Teresa.
Hi.
Sorry, I couldn't see anything, and you are TMM00. So
yeah,
I was like, I don't think that's. I don't have a student called something like that. So I was like, hi, Teresa. Any questions?
No, I'm good.
All right. Okay. Very good. All right. So we're going to take a 2-minute break, and then I'll queue up the second. Sorry, so that I can cough, and then we'll start the second part of the lecture. Okay.
Will today's slides be available on?
They already are on the web page.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What? Go ahead.
Mr. Tardo, I have my thing muted. So I just have a question. Correct, when we paraphrase, we also do citation paraphrasation. That's what I was taught.
Sorry, I didn't understand. Say again.
When you paraphrase, you also do a citation, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. You always cite, but it's when you're citing verbatim, then you put the reference. But when you're paraphrasing, you still put the reference.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Okay, Shannon, you were saying something.
Oh, I was wondering if the slides would be up on the site. I didn't find them, but I can go back in and look.
They go check while I'm taking my little break here, because I put them up right before starting. So maybe you looked earlier. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Very good. So I'm going to pause the recording here. All right. So we're going to get started again. I'm recording again, so don't say anything bad. Okay. All right. So now we're going to talk about predatory publishing, and you should have the slides on your screen. Do you see them?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So then predatory publishing and how to avoid it. Well, let me say right off the bat that some of what I'm going to talk about is sort of a broader view than just the practicalities of this, because I think it's important that you understand what is going on, because if you're going to be scholars, you need to understand in what environment you're operating as such. It's a mistake to operate in an environment that you don't understand. Okay, so it's going to be more than what you need for just the class, but I think it's important that you know. So what is happening and why should we care? Well, what is happening is that in the past 15 years, this a lot of publications have sprung up, the purpose of which is to make money and not to publish good scholarship. Okay? As a result, the quality of the research has taken a hit. Okay? Now, as scholars, of course, we should care about the quality of the research in the field, right? I mean, this is what we do. You know, if you are an engineer, you care that your bridges are working well and are not falling down, right? I mean, that's what engineers do, right? So you care about the quality. So we are scholars of linguistics. You know, we should care about the quality of the work of the scholarship in linguistics. But there are also other reasons that are less noble and far more practical, which are important. The first one is you may fall for it, okay? And I have seen colleagues, even at this university, who should have known better, and they end up publishing with predatory journals, or they end up quoting predatory journals, and that's not good. At best, it's a waste of time, okay? In other words, you just wasted your time, you read an article that is not good, you submitted an article to a publication that is not a valid publication, so even if they publish, the article is wasted. At worst, it invalidates your research. If you are quoting research that is no good, then your research is no good. If you're basing your conclusions on research that is no good, then your conclusions are no good. Okay? So the risk here is that if you use publications that come from the predatory world, the risk is that they're going to be low quality, which they probably are, and therefore you will then have been quoting low quality research, and then your research becomes low quality. Okay, so that's the reason, the practical reason why you need to be aware of this. Okay. So let's talk about sort of more in general what is happening. Where does this avalanche of predatory publishers come from? Well, what happened is that in the 1990s, the internet started becoming really popular. And by the way, if you're interested in this, in 1989, I connected using something called Gopher, which was then at the time like an earliest version of Gopher. I connected with the CERN, which is the research center in Switzerland, and logged on to something called the World Wide Web. And I poked around for a while, and then I thought, that's really stupid. There's nothing interesting here. This will never go anywhere. And I logged off. Just so you know that I'm not always right. But anyway, the internet took off in a major way. And soon Gopher added a search engine. Then there was something called Alta Vista, which I used for a while. And then Google came. And then, Google became the de facto directory of the web. So because of the possibility now of reproducing, and with computers, you can create copies of digital documents at no cost, right? If I send you all a PDF, you have the PDF, and I spent no money. I can email it to you, and it's free, right? So basically, you can distribute your scholarship for free. You can access scholarship basically for free using Google and so on. And because of this, people started putting their papers online in these archives. Okay, so they just create web pages and then they just post their articles on the web, which means that then it's even more interesting to go on the web and look for the articles. Right? A lot of the times, through Google Scholar, you can find PDFs of most articles that you need for a research paper. And that's super handy. Then there's like dark corners of the internet where you shouldn't go. But you can find stuff that should be paid for, that has been liberated, and that you can access through the dark web, among pornography and stolen credit cards and so on. You can find copies of books and so on. And to give you an idea, a colleague of mine that shall go nameless, one day said, Sal, do you have a PDF copy of your first book? And I said, of course not. He says, would you like one? I have it on my hard disk. And I was horrified, because there's my royalties flying out of the window, right? But I mean, the thing is, a lot of stuff is out there, and you can find it if you are good at navigating these things. And I'm not saying that you should. The dark web is a dangerous place, and you shouldn't go there. But if you go, bring me back some bitcoins, and then we'll set up something. No, I'm joking. Don't bring me bitcoins. And then the other thing with the people started creating these archives, especially in the sciences, mathematics, and so on, where you put your paper before it's even published. Okay? And needless to say, if you do that, that creates an interesting problem because, well, now it's not being refereed, right? So I don't know whether this article is any good. Okay? All right. So the internet comes along, and suddenly, basically, if you are a publisher who prints hard copy journals, you have a problem, right? Because now people can get a lot of the stuff for free on the web in digital copy, so much more convenient than paying hundreds of dollars for a journal. Yeah. So what happened is that the big publishers first, and then the smaller ones followed suit. They went online, because they said, why should we print, physical copies of journal, or we continue to print physical copies, but we're going to charge for people to read our journals online. And in the 1990s, all of the 5 major publishers did so. You see them listed on your slide. And that's a big chunk, because those 5 represent half of all publishing in the world. You know, so it's huge, right? And so those 5 went completely online. Then you had Google Books that started digitizing books from all the libraries that they could get their hands on, and they put quite a few up. Now the project seems to have stopped, but you know. And then Google Scholar, and there's other engines that search for ISI Web of Science. There's plenty of others. You know, give you access to these archives and these journals. You know, where the articles are. So basically, the scholarly publishing world moved online in the 1990s due to economic pressure. Okay, are you with me so far? That's the summary of what I've just said. Now, at the same time, another phenomenon took place, which was that of open access journals. Now, open access journals came from a very well-intentioned, even idealistic stance. That is, the idea is, as you may have heard, information wants to be free. You know, the idea was we're not going to charge people to read our journal. Okay, because once the article is produced, it should be free. Everybody should be able to read it. The authors want as many people as possible to read the article that they've written, right? Makes sense, yes. So they said, all right, we're not going to charge our readers. So there's 2 ways of doing this. If you're not going to charge them, because in a journal, you, the reader, pay the publisher for the right to read the paper, and then the publisher uses that money to print the journal and produce the journal and put it out there, right? So edit it, all of that. So if you are an open access journal, you don't get paid by the reader. So there's 2 options on how do you survive. You either do it for free as volunteer work, or you get the writer to pay. Okay? Now, volunteer works, sure. In the slide you see there on the bottom right, that's eJournal. This is a open access online journal that 2 former students of mine and Dr. Pickering started jointly while there were still students here. And now it's in, I think it's 5th or 6th year of publication. And they're publishing fantastic work, and they're doing extremely well. And it's completely free. Nobody gets paid for doing it. It's a labor of love. Okay, that's wonderful. But then you have other journals that said, all right, we're going to charge the writer. And they don't charge you $10, they charge you thousands. Okay? You know, it can be up to $2,000, $3,000 per article that you publish. Needless to say, you don't pay it out of your pocket. You use grant money, the university pays for it, whatever, right? But so this introduces a problem. Because now, as a journal, myself, where's my financial interest? If the readers are paying to read my stuff, where's my financial interest located? I want to publish the best stuff that there is, because then the readers will want to read it, right? If I am in the sciences, if I am Nature, I'm good to go, because everybody knows that Nature is the best journal that there is. Therefore, I'm going to subscribe to Nature and buy it so that I can read the best articles in the field, right? Now, if, however, we shift the model so that the person who pays is the writer, where does me, publisher, my financial interest reside? In publishing the most papers, because each time you give me $1,000, let's say, right? If I publish 10 articles, I make $10,000. If I publish 50 articles, I make $50,000, right? So which am I going to choose? I'm going to choose to publish 50 articles. And if I publish 100, I'm making 100,000, right? So in other words, the incentive is publish the most, not the best, right? And that is what then gave rise to predatory publishing. It started around 2007, 2008, so about 10 years ago. And at first, there weren't that many. And then, as you can see from the slide, it sort of like boomed. And now the last count that was in 2014, there were more than 400,000 predatory journals. It's an incredible number. It's in all disciplines, okay, not just linguistics. Linguistics has quite a few, but not that many. Why? Because there's money to be made. Okay, and basically by duping scholars who want to publish, they get paid and they make money, and then they publish anything. In fact, it's many people have sent joke articles in which they say ludicrous things that any self-respecting scholar should immediately identify as nonsense, and the predatory journals just publish them automatically because they have no standards. Of course they don't. They make money by publishing. If you pay them, they'll be happy to publish it. Okay? So as a little test, for 2 months, in December of 17 and January of 2018, I kept track of how many predatory journals solicited me. Okay, and there you have the list on the slide. Okay, you can amuse yourselves to count, however, how many they have, and some of them are just like unbelievable. My favorite one was the one that promised to accept my paper within 24 hours. I mean, that's incredible, right? You can't even read the paper within 24 hours. They were going to accept it. Have it reviewed, refereed, everything. Acceptance within 24 hours, right? So you know what a quality operation they are. Another one asked me to A, send an article, and B, join their editorial board. Okay, and they solicited me twice within the 2 months. Okay, it's spam. That's what it is. Okay, it was that and Viagra. Okay, because I mean it literally is spam. That's what it is. It's academic spam, right? All the titles look the same. International Journal of Humanities and Social Science Research, and all of this, right? If you go look at them, they look sort of relatively respectable. They have a web page, they have an editorial board, they claim to be indexed, they have citation indexes. It's all fake. It takes 5 minutes to create this. Okay, you can create a web page, you spend a few dollars, and you can do whatever you want, and you can claim whatever you want. Okay, and this is one of the problems of the new digital environment, is that your sources are no longer safe. They're no longer, you can't use them easily. So one of my favorite foils is Wikipedia, right? Now, Wikipedia, in case you're not familiar with it, is an encyclopedia that's edited by the users. So anybody can go in and edit Wikipedia. The result, of course, is that you can't use Wikipedia for scholarly purposes because you never know who's the last person that edited it, okay? So here's an example, which is pretty funny, regardless of whether you are pro or against the Republicans. The point is that somebody went into the science page of Wikipedia, the science page of the invertebrates, which is I think a genus of animals, and added House Speaker Paul Ryan, at the time he was the House Speaker, to the invertebrates. By the way, invertebrates means that they have no spinal cord, no spine, okay? So basically the joke was Paul Ryan is an invertebrate, okay? Now, I'm not saying this because of animosity toward Paul Ryan. I've never met him. But my point is anybody can do this, right? So if you're looking at Wikipedia and you are, researching invertebrates, you could fall for this, right? And you could say, well, and there's, 6 types of invertebrates, blah, blah, and Paul Ryan, right? I mean, okay, maybe that's unlikely, but I mean, my point is anyone can go and do that to a Wikipedia page, okay? And so if you go look at Wikipedia in an area that you're knowledgeable about, which as I have done, you can find that people go in and add themselves to the list of famous authors in the field when they're not famous at all. But they go and they put themselves in because they somehow think that that's good. And maybe somebody will discover and take it out, but it may stay there for months, but years. I mean, in some cases, people have put in jokes and deliberately wrong information, and it stayed in Wikipedia for years and years. There's a web page that documents Wikipedia hoaxes, and it's actually hilarious to read. If you've got nothing else to do, Google Wikipedia hoaxes, and you'll have some fun at Wikipedia's expense. So, in a sense, you remember that Dickens, it was the best of times, it was the worst of time. We kind of live in the best of time, worst of time for the availability of scholarship. On the one hand, you can access information so much more easily and fast and cheaply than it used to be the case, okay? I was, I came of age as a scholar in the 80s when none of this existed, and you had to make photocopies. That was the great technology, or otherwise you had to go sit in a library with a pen and a piece of paper, and you had to write down the quotes that you wanted to take from a book. Okay, let me tell you that makes you disciplined as to, do I really need to copy this quote? Okay. So the fact of being able to just download articles from my computer at home in my bunny slippers, forgive me, but I'm just happy, okay? It's the best that there is. On the other hand, this has a drawback, which is that because now there are, as we said, 400,000 predatory journals out there who make a living by publishing anything that gets sent to them. As a result, that means that anything that is written gets published. Okay? And if it gets published, some poor fool is going to quote it, thinking that it is a good source. Okay? And the result of this is that bad scholarship, subpar scholarship, is now flooding the field. And it's often difficult to tell it apart from good scholarship. Okay? And then there is another problem, which I mentioned before, and it's been already called, it even has a name, the Google Scholar effect, okay? So if you Google something on Google Scholar, what happens is that the top 5 articles are the ones that are most frequently cited. So because they show up on top, people look at them first and cite them more. So the result is that then there is a sort of a circle, a vicious circle here, is that the most cited articles get cited by everybody and no one cites anybody else. And the assumption is that because everybody is citing them, they're more credible, that they're better articles, okay? But if those articles happen to be bad, and they just end up on top of the search by accident, no one knows because nobody reads them anymore, right? And these guys, Sorenko and DeMay, did a study in 2015 and found that 30%, almost a third, of the citations were problematic. Okay, in other words, they were incorrect in some way or another. Okay? Over 30% of citations on the web are incorrect. That should make you pause and think really hard. Okay? That's why we always say, use Google Scholar and verify and check. Okay? Because otherwise you're going to fall for it. Now, remember the example that we saw in the mini lecture on why to quote, that I said, you know, this person here is quoting everything that they could find. This also is an effect of Google Scholar. It is, you know, basically people quote what they can find easily, right? You find 20 sources, you're like, well, I'm good to go, right? And regardless of whether these are MA theses from some random university that nobody's ever heard of, you know, and there's nothing wrong with random universities, but the problem is that it is quite possible that somebody who's not an expert in the field directed that thesis, okay? So smaller, lesser funded universities have a higher likelihood of producing low quality research. This is not, you know, bias, it's a fact, okay? So because of this, what you find is that people, it's kind of like they assume that the world was created 30 years ago, right? You know, in other words, that nothing was ever said about anything until, you know, the internet started existing, and then we can quote those sources. So people will quote a web page when there is a book on the subject. And the book is, of course, 10 times better than the web page. Okay? Now, it can be worse. You know, it can be malicious. And in fact, you do have cases in which people deliberately use this fact to mislead people and to introduce false information. I get fake news, right? That's what everybody calls them today. Introduce false information into the scholarly world. Because again, remember that here, these agents, these people, they're only motivated by benefit. They're not motivated by doing research. They don't care about research. What they care about is making a buck. So here's how they do it, by the way. So one thing is you fund research that fits your position, right? And you don't fund research that would go against your position, right? Or you bias research, you fund research across the board, but then you only pay to publish the research that goes in the direction that you want. And the results that don't go in the direction that you want, you don't publish, you don't make it public. So for example, there has been for a very long time uncontrovertible scientific evidence linking the use of tobacco with cancer, all right? And we know that the tobacco industry suppressed the evidence as much as possible by basically engaging in both of these things. On the one hand, they promoted research that said that tobacco was not responsible, and they promoted research that indicated that other things were responsible for cancer, not tobacco, okay? And of course, you know, now we know that this was the case, and that they've known all along. If you're interested, there's a couple of sources there that I've put. You can look those up and do it in more detail. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on malicious agents, because for what we do, it's usually not an issue, but you need to be aware that that's quite possible. Most of the time is just mistakes. That is, people who haven't done their homework, who did a poor job of doing their research. So here is an example that I came across and I was amused by, because they quote me. And it's an article by these two scholars. I think they are either Czech or Romanians, maybe. But anyway, so they published this article, and in the article they discuss the use of laughter to indicate humor. And they say, and you have there in red the offending quote, the concept of laughter was used as an indicator of humor, not only by Attardo, but also by other people. Okay? Needless to say, I said that you cannot use laughter to identify humor. In other words, I said the exact opposite of what these two think I said. Okay? Reliable scholarship? What do you think? So what do you think if you came across this and you quoted this and you said, as is well known, Attardo says that laughter is an indicator of humor. Right? No good. Here's another example. This is an article by a guy named Meng that was published in Overseas English. And he says that an author, Nord is the name of the author, she says, Nord argues that Scopus theory is a theory of translation. So she says, Nord argues that Scopus theory has three things. One, the scopus or purpose of the translation. Two, the coherence rule. And three, the fidelity rule, i.e. faithfulness to the source text. If you've even opened Nord's book, Nord says the fidelity rule is nonsense. Okay, so in other words, it's the opposite of what Meng is saying Nord said. Okay, so again, good scholarship. If you were doing a paper on translation, would you came across Meng, you'd be like, oh, sure, great. Look, I don't need to read Nord. See what I'm saying? Okay, so in other words, you cannot trust something just because it was published somewhere. You need to go beyond that. The fact that it was published somewhere means basically nothing. Okay? Now, let's be very clear. I'm not just making fun of people who don't have access to the same kind of libraries that I have access to. Okay? My point is much more subtle. In the past, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that kind of mistake you made as a student. Okay? And your teacher caught it, slapped you left and right and up and down till you were silly, and then it was thrown away into a wastebasket paper and nobody ever saw it. Nowadays, it's on the internet, anybody can see it, and anybody can find it. And if they don't know what they're talking about, or they don't bother reading the sources like they do anymore, they just put a list of sources, and then you think that it's an okay source because it's in the list, right? So now you have to read through and say, this is crap, this is crap, this is crap, and discard it. Okay? So that's a huge problem that 30 years ago didn't exist. 30 years ago, if it was published, it was good. It was a guarantee. That guarantee has gone away to a certain extent. We don't need to worry about this. Now here, Serenko and Dumay, are talking about the Google Scholar effect, and you can read this. But what they say is that because authors are misquoting, they jeopardize the production of new knowledge. Okay, and that's really the big concern. So young researchers tend to over-rely on information that is quickly accessible, okay? And that's the mistake, is you download 20 articles and you say, all right, my paper is written. All I need to do is plunk these titles and these references in my paper and I'm good to go. In reality, you're just starting, okay? All right, so at this point you may say, well, how can I know if this is a valid source or not? All right, so here's how you do it, okay? First of all, you assess the quality of the journal or the book in which the article is being published, okay? However, there is a caveat which we're going to talk about in the next slide. So then how do you do this assessment? Well, first of all, there is a list that a guy named Jeffrey Bell, who was on campus, I think 3 years ago, he kept a list of predatory journals, he had to shut it down because they sued him. Predatory publishers sued him, and so the university caved like immediately, and so they made him take it down. But the list is still available on the internet because people had copied it, and that's one of the things about the internet. It's impossible to remove stuff from it. And so find the list and see whether it's listed as being predatory. If it is, then you know it's a bad source. There's other sources, but you have to pay in order to access them. The other thing is look at who is the publisher. Okay, so if it's a major publisher like Elsevier, Springer, Verlag, Wiley Blackwell, Tyler and Francis, or Sage, these are major publishers with major reputation. What they do is good. So if it's published by one of those companies, you know it's good. Also, university presses tend to be good. Okay, so if it's published by Oxford University Press, Cambridge University Press, Massachusetts Institute of Technology Press, Indiana University Press, Ohio State University Press, good. Okay, so big universities or medium universities tend to have university presses that produce very high quality scholarly material, right? So if it's published by one of those two, it's good. If it's published by some random organization, unless you know the organization. So for example, the Linguistic Society of America publishes language, right? There you go, very good, right? Extremely reliable, excellent source. TESOL was published by the TESOL Quarterly was published by the TESOL Association up until recently. Then they farmed it out. So if you know the organization, then that's good. If you don't know the organization, it could be anyone. Okay, remember, it costs less than a few $100s to go online, open a web page, and create a web page for a fake organization and a web page for a fake journal. It doesn't take that long. Okay. Then, if you don't know the publisher, it's not one of the big ones. You don't recognize it. Look at the editorial board. Okay. If the editorial board are big names that teach at major universities, then it's good. If these people you know from the field that they're good scholars and they are on the editorial board, that's good. However, be careful, and you'll see in the next slide why you need to be careful about that. And finally, look at the number of citations. Really strong articles that are important in the field, despite the Google effect, tend to have the most citations. Okay, so if you can find an article that has more than 30, 50, 60 citations, it probably is a good source, probably being the operational term. Now, obviously, this doesn't work for very recent papers. If the paper came out in 2018, we are in the spring of 2019, there just hasn't been enough time to gather these citations, right? So then you shouldn't say, well, this paper just came out, it only has 3 citations, I'm not going to quote it because obviously it's bad because it only has 3 citations. Right? That's not the way it works. All right, so now to make things more complicated, even if you find that it's indexed in like the most reputable indexes out there, because it's actually very easy to get yourself indexed. Just a few, maybe $100. Okay, and so it means nothing to be indexed. Impact factor, which is supposed to be, how many articles cite the articles that are in your journal, and the ratio of articles in your journal to articles that cited from outside. Impact factors can be faked. I can say that my journal has an impact factor of 2.3. Who's going to go check? Where do you go check? There isn't a registry of impact factors. Okay? Claims of peer reviewing. Sometimes what they do is they send the article to people like me, and you write back and you say, sorry, I'm too busy, I cannot review it, but it looks fine. And then they say, oh, Attardo said it looks fine, it's been reviewed. And they do this, okay? I mean, I'm not joking. So peer reviewing, again, can be faked, or you can just lie about it. If the website looks really professional and slick, all you need to do is hire a freelance graphic designers. They'll create a very, very slick web page for pennies. Now, the names on the editorial board, sometimes they just put them in. And you never agreed to it, and suddenly you find that you're on the editorial board of the Journal of, sheep grazing in Eastern Catalonia. And you're like, but I don't know anything about it. I never heard of this. And even when you find out that they've put you on an editorial board of a fake journal, you write to them and say, take it down. They don't do it. Because what you're going to do? Sue them? Okay? So you need to be super careful. Sometimes fake journals just hijack a real journal page and create a page that looks exactly like it, but has a different web page. So if you land on it, you think you're talking to the real journal, but in fact, you're talking to the fake journal. Okay? And then don't trust when they say that their address is American or Canadian, because addresses can be faked, phone numbers can be faked. Okay? So the only thing that can really help you is basically looking at all of these factors together, okay? And if anything smells funny, then check with someone like me who is an expert in the field and says, that looks fake, okay? Because we know, or Dr. Pickering, Dr. Lee, Dr. Hempelman, Dr. Chen, you know, we know the journals in our field, right? And so we'll say, I've never heard of this, Journal of Linguistic Science Research. If I've never heard of it, it's probably crap. You don't know for sure, okay? Who knows? There might be a journal that I've never heard of, okay? But if I haven't heard of it, usually it really means that it's not a good journal, because otherwise I would have heard of it, okay? So your best bet is to check all of the things that I've just said, and then ask an expert in the field, is this a good, reputable journal? Is this a journal that I can use for my purposes? Okay? All right. Sorry, Ari, your timing is not the best, but you're in time to ask questions. Are there any questions, anyone?
No, I can't. I mean, I just came back from a meeting, so not. No, thank you, sir.
All right. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
So most of the research that I've been doing for my paper so far has been journal articles that I've pulled through the library. Is it safe to assume that those have all been vetted?
No.
No. Okay.
No. Now it's better because they tend to vet them to some extent, but they buy them in large packages, so you don't know for sure.
Okay.
Okay, so you really need to say, this journal but okay, give me an example. Like, for example, give me a for instance of a journal that you've used.
All my papers are upstairs.
All right, don't worry about it then. No, don't worry.
Here's one. Let's see. This is not immediately on here. Well, this is from the University of Texas at Austin, so it's probably okay.
All right, so there you go. You see, they're very good. I like this because it shows. See, we didn't prepare this. Tuma00 and I did not collude prior to this.
No.
It's okay. It's published at University of Texas at Austin. Chances are it's a good publication.
Okay.
Right. So there you go. Right. Now, again, we don't know for sure.
Right.
I mean, after all, you know, they're in Austin. Maybe they were when they published that, they were like partying on 6th Street. Okay, but we don't know that. But otherwise, we assume that it's a good publication, right? All right. Do you have any other example?
They're all in the other room.
Yeah. Right. Anybody else has an example of something that they would like to look up? No?
Mine are all in my iPad. I have to go and find
They're all
them.
in your iPad. Okay. All right. Okay. Anyway, the point is, you know, it's going to be a one, you know, each single instance is going to be different. Okay. So let's do something here. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to, where's my Safari? That's not what I want. All right, so I'm going to share my window here. Where is it? Okay, I've lost my, it's very strange. Okay. Oh, there it is. All right, so are you seeing Google Scholar? Yes?
Yes.
Good. All right, so give me a topic, somebody. Come on, free research, give me the topic of your paper.
I guess I'm for baking.
Okay. Well, that's not a good one, because nobody's going to publish fake scholarship on that. Come on.
Mine is use of L1 in the L2 classroom.
Brilliant. All right. So perfect. So here we have an article by Schweers Jr. Okay, and we can download very nicely the PDF here. It's been cited 510 times. That's a lot, right? And it is in the English Teaching Forum. All right. I happen not to know the English Teaching Forum, so we're going to get this article for us. Here it is. Looks relatively okay. You know, of course, however, we find that it's not really a scholarly source. It's more like, it's very short to begin with. It's what, like 4 pages long. So it's not a scholarly source to begin with. All right, okay, so let's pick something else.
What would be considered a scholarly source for page length?
More than that, like 10, 15, 20. I mean, this is just like this is like a bulletin, like a professional bulletin. It's not a scholarly journal. I mean, you can quote it, but it's just not a scholarly source. Okay. So here you have TESOL Quarterly. That one is good because we know that, right? So let's go on the 10th page of our results. Let's see. There might be something more interesting stuff in here. No, still stuff like TESOL Quarterly coming all the way. So this might be, yeah, applied linguistics, general. All of this is very good stuff. So unfortunately, not a good. Okay, so here we have the Foreign Language Annals. Well, all right, it's Wiley, so it's probably good. So that doesn't very good. Here, an article by Bozorgian and Falapur in the Iranian Journal of Language Teaching Research. All right, so let's check it out, and we can download the full text here. So we're gonna go check it out, and it's through Eric. Okay, so that's a government agency that does it. So that's respectable. You can download here the thing. Now this is published at Urmia University Press by the university, by an Iranian university, right? So in principle, this could be a good resource. Okay, because it's a university press. However, what do we know about scholarship in Iran?
I don't know anything.
Yeah, and do you think there is a reason? I mean, is it just that Shannon is ignorant of the wonderful research that they're doing in Iran?
Possibly, or not.
Yeah, possibly, yes. I mean, it is possible. But let me add that I too am not aware of the wonderful research done at Urmia University, because I'd never heard of Urmia University until about 12 seconds ago when I first read it. Okay? Has anybody heard of Urmia University?
No.
No. Okay? So without being mean, because I'm sure that the people in Urmia are wonderful people, okay? I'm not going to assume that that's a good source, okay? Because it comes from a source that I cannot validate, okay? If it had been from Berkeley, then I would have said, all right, I know Berkeley, I've heard of Berkeley. There is a reason why you've heard of Berkeley.
So that means, Dr. I cannot, you're saying basically we shouldn't get the resource from foreign universities?
No.
They're very well known.
No. Not at all. Not at all. Let's say that you find a resource that's from the Sorbonne in France. That's probably high quality.
Oh.
Okay? Let's say that you find something from Tsinghua University in Beijing. Count your blessings. It's going to be the best that you can find.
Oh.
Okay? Now, the problem with that is I know maybe 5 universities in China. Okay, and I can say, yeah, if it's Tsinghua, if it's Beijing University, you know, if it's Shanghai University, yeah, okay. But then you find the University of Podunk, China. It's very strange. There is a Podunk in China. No, there's not. I'm making this up entirely. But if it's some small university that I've never heard of, how do I know? You see, and that's the problem. It's not that you say, oh, if it's not published in the U.S., then it's no good. That's not the right attitude. But in order for you to be confident to use it, you need to at least have heard of the place or have other reason to believe that it's good. So, you know, let's go check this out. I mean, we don't know, but they have a website here which we can check out. So we're going to do exactly that. We're going to go and check out the website.
I guess I'm asking the question.
There is the website, okay? So now we have the journal, right? It's an open access journal done by Urmia University. I just need to look it up now in a minute to find out here. So let's see who is their editorial board, and here it is. All right, so we have the founding editor-in-chief from Urmia University, all right. The editorial assistant, so the staff is all from Urmia University. And then on the editorial board, there is somebody from University of Maryland, somebody from Pennsylvania State University, who is Suresh Kanagarajan, who is one of the major names in the field. Okay, then everybody is from Iran, somebody from Australia, somebody from Canada, somebody from Turkey, somebody from Cambridge, UK, somebody from China, and then somebody from a British university, right? So at this point, I would say, all right, maybe, maybe not, okay? Because I've got one person here that even I know, and this is applied linguistics, so it's not really my field, but even I have heard of these people. And they have a few people. It's not like everybody is in Iran, okay? It's like it has as at least an international outlook on the editorial board, okay? So that would lead me to think that it's probably a good source, okay? The other thing was, remember, it came through Eric. So that has some degree of guarantee that it's going to be okay, okay? Now, if I were really suspicious, what I would do is I would email Suresh, whom I happen to know, well, Dr. Pickering knows him personally. I know him through Dr. Pickering. I would email him and say, is this a legit journal or did they just steal your name? Right? And if he says, I've never heard of these clowns, then I'd be like, aha, not a serious journal. If he says, no, of course, you should meet Karim, my best friend. We always hang out and have beers. All right, well then it's a legitimate journal.
So
okay?
let's say that it's one of us who just did everything that you did.
Yeah.
But we're not able to email Professor Kanagaraja because
right.
we don't have an email address. Should we just opt to not use it in that case?
Well, then it sort of becomes a question of you know, let's look at the quality of the research then, right? I mean, once you're like, okay, the journal could be or not, we don't know. So then you say, all right, so then let's go look at it. Okay, and so we're going to look at, does anybody remember what was the paper that I had found? Oh, here it is. 2015 Bozorgian. All right. How do I get the other issues? Archives. Right now in Iran, they're saying, my God, somebody from the US is accessing us. This is awesome. Little do they know. Not here.
There was the second one.
Yeah, that's what I realized.
There it is. Teachers and students amount and purpose
Where is
of
it?
L. Halfway down, teachers and students amount.
Yeah, it is. Yes, I got it. Very good. Thank you. All right, so first of all, it's pages 67 to 82, so it's about 15 pages long. That's good. Okay, so here it is. Okay, we can start reading the abstract. A surge of interest in using first language and English second foreign language learning has been developed. Despite this absurd, the concern about using L1 by teachers and students is still important. The focus of the study is to investigate the amount and purpose of L1 use in the FL classroom in 2 English language institutes in Iran. So, all right, they collected data, 12 sessions, 6 male, 6 female, 155 students. All right, looks good. Looks like quality. Okay, I mean, they're telling you they did the research, they gathered the data, they did. So just from reading the abstract, I'm saying, okay, this looks actually pretty good. Okay, so then you start reading it and you say, all right, is he quoting the right things? Okay, Cook, Atkinson, these are just names that I recognize, Stables, Vygotsky, yeah, all right, this looks good. All right, so now let's go find out where is Urmia Iran.
So unfortunately, we aren't able to look at all of those sources and just know by looking at them that they're good. Cook and Miles. And,
well, but you've been reading stuff.
Yeah.
You've been reading stuff, right? So the names should start. Oh, it's near Tabriz. Look at that. Fantastic.
So it's good.
See, now we know where Urmia University is in case we ever happen to be in Iran, and you go knock and say, hey, can I talk to the editor-in-chief? And everybody will be like, wow, these guys, really know their stuff. Fun times. So yeah, I mean, I understand it's not easy. It's not something that you just, you just waltz in it and you start doing it, but you are becoming an expert on your topic, right? So you should recognize some of the names in the discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. Vygotsky you should recognize because you've done enough applied linguistics that should ring a bell. The methodology and that kind of stuff, you should say, yeah, that looks decent, that looks professional. Okay, so that's how you make those decisions.
I'm sorry, Dr. I want to make sure I'm understanding this.
Yeah.
So it's up to me, see if I can use that resource.
Yes.
Or I have to get your approval. That's what.
No, it's up to you. You're the one that makes the decision. Now, if your decision is wrong, you're the one who's in trouble.
Okay.
Okay. Now, you can ask me.
Okay.
Right? But not for every source. You cannot say, Dr. Attardo, I have 25 sources here. Could you please check all 25? One student tried to do that, and I said, hey, that's your job, not mine. Okay, if you say, okay, I'm stuck on this one. I just cannot find anything. I've tried everything. I just cannot make a decision. I really want to use it, because it's really like central for my paper. Then, okay, ask me. But otherwise, don't use it, right? If it's not super important, don't use it.
Okay.
On average, how many sources do you want us to have for our research paper?
Enough.
Still asking.
Enough.
Yes.
Okay.
Not too many, not too little. Just enough is about right. Sorry, I'm being a smarty pants, as they say. This is the one question that every student asks me, every class, every year. It's been 30 years, and every time they ask me the same question, and I answer exactly the same way every time. Because, you see, the problem is this. There is no answer that is valid across the board, okay? So, for example, for the use of L1 in an L2 classroom, 100 sources is probably too little. Don't panic, okay? Relax. Don't jump out of the window. I see a window behind you. Do not jump. Okay? I'm exaggerating, but you'll be fine with 25, 30, 40 sources. Okay? You will have the embarrassment of riches. Okay? Now, Mimi, how many sources are there on the use of eye tracking in turn taking?
I have
No. Eye tracking on turn, specifically on the use of turn taking.
Maybe 25.
Okay, so there's if she's lucky, there's 25 sources in the world on the topic that she's writing about. Right? Now, if I say to her, well, you need about 30 sources. Could you come closer to the camera so that they can see? No, I'm joking. Then she's going to try and jump, and we're on the 3rd floor here, so that's really bad. Okay, so you see the reason why I cannot give you an answer, because it depends on your topic. Okay, and depending on the topic, 25 can be everything that has ever been written on the subject. Good luck finding it, or it can be a minuscule piece that Shannon will just like quote it on the first page of her research. Okay, because then if you have, like Shannon, embarrassment of riches, then you need to say, now I'm going to quote only the 10 that are the most quoted, that everybody quotes across the various articles, the clear leaders in the field. Mimi has got to quote everything. Even, some poor bastard that nobody has quoted before, who will then write her letter, say, thank you for quoting my paper. You're the first one ever, It's been sitting there for 5 years. Nobody's ever quoted it. Good for you, you found it and quoted it. You see the difference? I mean, it's like there's the pariahs of research who have, you know, one quote from Mimi. And they're like, woohoo, honey, I was quoted today, right? And then you have, you know, the people in Shannon's field that they're like, yeah, you know, 50 quotes today, that's nothing. You know, it's like, clearly the topic is no longer worth researching. You see? So because of this, I cannot give an answer across the board.
Okay.
Relax, Shannon. Don't panic.
My field's too broad, too big.
Ah, you narrow it down. Narrow it down.
Yeah, I will.
Go towards the light.
There might not be a light.
There might not be a light. See, I like your attitude. That's exactly right.
Okay.
All right. Other questions?
For looking at citation patterns and checking the number of citations, that's just, for example, you just did a search on Google Scholar and it had cited number of times.
Yeah,
and
yeah, and the library has also ISI Web of Science, which is very good for that. It will also give you the number of citations. But the best thing to do is not to look at the numbers, but to look at, if you're looking at 20 articles, you will start noticing that some articles get quoted over and over and over in the 20 articles. That is the best sign of importance. Because remember, from the Google Scholar effect, you can have 100 citations for no reason. You know, the real criterion is who is being quoted by everybody in the field.
Yeah.
That's when you know that it's important.
That makes sense.
Okay?
okay.
All right. Any other questions?
Oh,
Well, yeah.
I think we have lots of questions just about life. What is it all about?
What is life all about? That's another course. That's Ethics 101, and I'm not qualified to answer those questions.
Okay.
Well, I mean, you know, yeah, it's difficult. You know, I mean, if you feel like, you know, hard put upon right now, yes, you are. This is difficult stuff. You know, I mean, honestly, did you think that we gave out masters, people just like, hey, here, have a master's? You know, I mean, this is hard work. This is real difficult stuff. You know, it's like the process of being an expert in a field is complicated, right? It requires hard work and perseverance. Yeah. I mean, and remember, it's not enjoyable when you're doing it, but it's extremely enjoyable when you're done with it. Because then you're like, ooh, I know this stuff. Right? And that's a lot of fun. When people come to you and say, is this a good journal? And you're like, oh yeah, you know, I know this guy. Ooh, that's good. You know? But in order to get there, you have to go through the slog of reading everything and figuring it out and you know, doing the hard work. All right. Anything else? We probably should stop before I choke to death here.
I'm okay. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Then if there are no further questions,